Neuro-agility stands on two legs, and the first leg is what we refer to as brain fitness, or it's about the drivers that impacts a person's brain fitness and optimizes your performance. Now, brain fitness is one aspect of six different drivers that in the bigger picture improves our overall brain performance. Now, when we look at brain fitness, we often we would refer to this as being homolateral or bilateral. And the word homo means one, and the word bi means two, which means I use both hemispheres. So if I'm homolateral, I have a tendency to alternate between my hemispheres, where if I'm bilateral, I utilize and process information with both hemispheres simultaneously. So generally, just in layman's terms, we refer to this principle as brain fitness. But if we want to optimize our performance, you cannot start at any other place than looking at your own personal brain fitness levels. In other words, to what extent are you utilizing the left and right hemispheres simultaneously, but also the front and the back parts of the brain simultaneously, and the bottom and top parts of the brain simultaneously as well. We have to remember that neuroagility is about learning fast and easy and being very flexible to move between the different brain regions depending on what is required of me in that situation to do. So if I'm in a problem-solving situation and I am required to go into a mode of analytical thinking in order to solve a problem, I need to have that flexibility to easily and fast go to the left hemisphere. But in the same instance, to flex back to the bigger picture and to be innovative and creative about this. So it's never about being the one hemisphere or the other, but true neuroagility is to have a flexible mind that is analytical and creative at the same time. Now, just to give you an example, as you are looking at me there today, what I'd like you to do is just extend your hands like what I'm doing now and make a hole with your hands not bigger than a golf ball. And then you look at the screen through this hole in your hands. And as you are doing that, now first close your left eye, then open it. Then close your right eye and open it. Now, why I asked you to do this was to just notice that with the one eye, you could still see the screen. But with the other eye, when you closed it, then the screen disappeared. So you experienced the concept of dominance. And this just shows you how we utilize both hemispheres. So I am looking at you using both eyes, and my eyes are the only part of my brain that is visible. So how my eyes work beautifully illustrates how the brain works. So I am looking at you with both eyes because I'm using both eyes. But when I do this exercise, like I asked you to do now, one eye leads and one follows. And this is how the brain works. So we need to use the whole brain, even though certain areas will lead depending on the function that you have to execute. And therefore, you need to have that brain fitness, that flexibility to move easily from one area to the other area. Now, what we have to remember, brain fitness is a competence we develop. Just as we are born with two legs, but it doesn't mean we can walk, so we are born with two brain hemispheres, but we have to learn to utilize both hemispheres simultaneously. For instance, if you look at me, what I'd like you to do with me is clap your hand, cross over, touch your nose in your ear, and then switch over to the other side. Now, as you are doing this with me, notice how easy and how fast you can do it, because it will also give you an indication of how flexible you are on a brain fitness level. Because we have to remember the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and the right brain hemisphere controls the left side of the body. So when I do a simple movement activity like this, it actually requires of me to utilize the whole brain. And therefore, when we go to the next slide, you will see that brain fitness literally means that it's about utilizing all the areas of the brain and accessing all those areas of the brain that will make you responsive and to utilize the brain at optimum level. And this is a competence that we develop through mental and physical stimulation. And the challenge is, it's not something you develop once. We can't practice in life, and after we've become fit once, now we will stay fit for the rest of our lives. And that principle is exactly the same with brain fitness. So if I don't use it, I lose it. But it's very important to understand that this will have a huge impact on the ease, the speed, and the flexibility with which you utilize your brain and process information. Now, the next driver that can optimize our brain profoundly is if we have very strong stress coping abilities. Now, stress means to lose control. And the moment that people start experiencing stress, literally what happens is our brain produces certain chemicals which we refer to as inhibiting chemicals. So the stress hormone's name is called cortisol. But when we produce too much cortisol over a long period of time, we start losing control over certain brain parts and certain brain areas. And that will then inhibit our thinking, our learning, and our performance, and even our hand-eye coordination profoundly. So there's a big difference between stress and pressure, because pressure means that I'm still focused and motivated, but I've not switched off. But stress means to lose control. And when we lose control, that can never spell anything good. So the point that I want to make here today is that stress is the brain's greatest enemy. It causes illness, it shuts down certain brain regions, so there is no way that stress can optimize your performance. So we need to have very good stress coping mechanisms that will help us to function under high pressure, but we will not lose control. And switching off and not coping with the pressures and demands of change may make us lose control over our brain. So one of the things we need to do, therefore, and be cognizant of if we want to optimize performance, is to really make sure we develop and maintain very good stress coping mechanisms. Now, the third driver that has an immense impact on our performance is sleep. Because if we do not sleep well enough, then we cannot be as agile and as alert as we possibly could be. Now, when we look at this slide of the benefits of sleep, many good things happen when we sleep. And the first thing is when we go into that resting phase and we go into the deeper cycles of sleep, that is where we produce the neurotransmitters, the names of chemicals that are very good for the immune system, good for happiness, good for healing, and good for mental alertness. So lack of sleep directly causes low alertness. Now, if we do dangerous jobs or our jobs entail that we have to pay attention to details because those details are important, like I am a chartered accountant, I need to make sure that I am accurate and correct in what I do and the numbers that I pay attention to. So therefore, mental alertness is going to be a vital prerequisite. But if we do not sleep long enough and also deep enough, and I'll get to a slide about that just now, but long enough for most people will be between about 7.5 to 8 hours per day. Some people may need more, some maybe a little less, but that would be roughly the benchmark for adults. But it's also important that we have to understand, because our lives are demanding when we sleep, it's where we re-energize. It is where the body heals and repairs damaged cells. It makes your mind more absorbent and receptive if you sleep well. And then obviously it helps us to clear away brain clutter. And in a world of information overload, we need to be as switched on as possible to have that ability to filter between data and interesting information, important information, and what is actually necessary. So no space and place for brain clutter as well. So sleep is more important than we've ever understood before for optimized brain performance. Now we know, if we look at this slide, that the brain goes into different states, and that means your brain cells fire at in different rhythms. But these different states will influence our levels of alertness in very different ways. So at this moment, as you are now learning, you may be in a low beta state, maybe high alpha state, where you are absorbing information, where you are processing and thinking about this. So gamma, you will see it's high and fast brainwave rhythms, so they have many cycles per second. And when we're there, it's where we're really very active. We're in a mode of performance, and the mind's focus is mainly more on expressing, doing, and performing. So beta state is really a state for having an active mind. But alpha state is your state for being reflective and being receptive. This is where we sit and we absorb information. So in the beginning process of learning, where we absorb information, that is the state of mind that we would like to be in. So if someone, for instance, tells us you need to relax, it means you need to do things that will help you activate alpha state in order to have a receptive mind. But when we fall asleep, it's where we start going through in theta state. We become drowsy, we fall asleep, and we may even dream. So my brain, the cycles per second, my brainwave rhythms are starting to get much slower. But for us to really have an effective, a good quality sleep, we need to access the deep delta state. And this is where we have very slow neuron firing. That is where you are almost unconscious. In other words, you are not dreaming, you are just out. And you need to be there around about 4.5 to 5 hours if you actually want to produce those neurotransmitters that are so important for memory and concentration, and obviously for being a neuro-agile person. So many times people sleep long enough, but not deep enough, and therefore they have not rested, and then it will very negatively still impact their mental alertness. So when we look at the next slide, it just illustrates how important it is for us to have a good night's sleep. So we need to sleep roughly between 7 and 8 hours per night. But if we look at this slide, then all these cycles are very important. But the first 2 cycles, in other words, the first 4.5 to 5 hours, is the most important part of our sleep, because that's where our brainwave rhythms slows down, where we go into the deep alpha state. That's where we re-energize. It's where we heal. It's where we produce those vital neurotransmitters. And that is why a good quality sleep is just not negotiable. Now, the fourth driver that optimizes our performance is movement. And we have a saying that says movement is the door to learning. So for the brain to have all these benefits, movement is a vital trigger. When we move, we switch on certain areas of the brain. And how this works is movement triggers an area in the brain called the reticular activation system. And this system switches on the thinking centers of the brain and decides to which area, which impulses will be sent. So the first place we need to move when we think, and that's why you will find if people learn or sometimes have to solve a problem while they're on the phone, they will rather prefer to walk, because that movement switches on the brain. But then also we need to understand, if we execute smart moves, And the other name for that are cross-lateral movement activities. Now, cross-lateral movement activities is where we utilize all the different areas of the brain. So when we do sports like aerobics and karate and swimming, the martial arts, it requires us to utilize the whole brain. And therefore, it helps that those moves are called smart moves because they are cross-lateral. We have to use the whole brain in order to do it. So movement switches on the brain, and then it helps to improve my brain fitness. But when we move and we are slightly tired, like when we do an exercise, we absorb more oxygen, and oxygen is fuel for your brain. So more oxygen is absorbed into your bloodstream. Oxygen-rich blood goes to your brain. Your brain extracts the oxygen. So movement energizes the brain and is therefore very important within the regard of improving your mental alertness. But when we move, even if we're tired, we will often feel very good after the exercise. Why? Because you have produced vital chemicals called endorphins. So when we sleep, we manufacture those neurotransmitters. But for instance, when we move is where we secrete those neurotransmitters into the system that is the good fuel we need if we really want to outthink, outlearn, outcreate the competition. Now, when we look therefore at the benefits of movement, we will see that there are tremendous benefits. It activates the brain, it energizes our system. It really helps us make more connections. And we have to remember that if we talk about people who are smart, or we talk about improving brain power, it's not about growing new or more brain cells, but it's about empowering the brain to make more connections so I can have a better communication network in my brain. And movement is a vital trigger for being able to do that. And that is why we say movement is the door to learning. The fifth driver that we look at is called attitude. Now, attitude is the way that you habitually think. It is literally how we make connections in our brain. So at this moment, as you are sitting there and listening to me, inside the white and gray matters of your brain cells, the dendrites of your brain cells are connecting with other dendrites, forming neuron pathways. That is the biology of thinking and of learning. And it's also the basis of what we call neuroplasticity. So the good news is that tonight when you go to sleep, your brain will actually look different on the inside than what it looked like when you woke up this morning if you flexed some mental muscle and you built a lot of neuron pathways. Now, attitude is just when we have reinforced these pathways and they have changed into permanent pathways. And that will then influence us to act and think and learn in certain habitual ways. And what is important about this one is we can never be more than our thinking. And therefore, our thinking, our mindsets will have a huge impact on our agility, how easily we adapt and adjust and how flexible we are. Most people tend to be more rigid in their thinking, just wanting to stay stuck in the pathways that are familiar to them, but sometimes not wanting to build new neuron pathways. For instance, that's why we tend to rely on a GPS rather than trying to figure out my journey from one point to another. That's why we want to use the calculator, because it's easier and faster, and we start believing it's actually more accurate because we do not want to build new pathways and flex mental muscle. But we have to remember, I do not want to distinguish between these factors and say one is more important than the other, because they are all of primary importance. But it is very important to remember that I can be brain fit and I have good stress coping mechanisms and I sleep well. But if my attitude sucks and if my wiring here tells me I am not okay, I am dumb, I'm stupid, I can't do this, if I have a negative mind, it will produce a negative result. a negative life. A negative mind produces a negative life and negative behavior. A positive mind produces a positive life and positive behavior. So a negative mind can never produce positive results and an agile mind. So mindset is very, very important. It's of primary importance because it's not just the pathways that we form, but it also, our brain works electrochemically. So these pathways and our thinking also triggers biochemical responses. And those chemicals may be either good fuel or bad fuel. And research tells us that most people's mindsets in general throughout the day tend to be more negative than positive, and therefore we produce more inhibiting chemicals rather than facilitating chemicals. And what this means, we function most of the time more on bad fuel rather than good fuel, and that's why our immune system gets compromised and where people's energy is drained and where we become sick very quickly. So our mindset is everything. It determines who we are. So it is of crucial importance that we really become our own best friends and best allies rather than our own worst enemies. Now, the realities of life are negative, many of them, and we have to learn to deal with that. But many people allow those realities to control them and make them negative. Now, if we look at this slide on the left-hand side, it illustrates how we will produce chemicals that come in between the dendrites of certain cells that will negatively inhibit or prevent electrical impulses from being processed. So, for instance, if I'm fearful, if I have a pessimistic mind, I am conditioning myself, I am wiring myself in a negative way. But with that goes a chemical outcome that seals the deal. It cements me into not having that mental flexibility to transmit messages. So a negative mind can never be our ally. We also have to remember, Einstein said, you can never solve a problem with the same type of thinking that created the problem. So if we want to get to a solution, then we got to think optimistically. We got to think solutions. We got to be possibility thinkers. But a negative mind does not produce positive results. The good news, even in life, when we deal with negative realities, but we choose to run on good fuel. We choose to be hopeful. We choose to stay optimistic. We choose to be in a habitual, positive way, dealing with our challenges in the best constructive way we can. It helps us move forward. And here, I am not at all promoting falseness, this false positivity that we often find in our world. I am rather talking about realistic optimism. We know what the truth is, we know what the realities are, and we are not trying to see anything else than what it is, but we choose to approach these realities in constructive ways where the problem becomes a challenge, and challenges are things that we can overcome and find solutions for. But the moment we choose to do that, we start changing the chemicals that run our mind, and so we become our best enemies. So mindset and attitude is everything. Now, when we look at the last driver in the framework that I have developed to look at neuro-agility, it is all about brain food. Now, our brain produces 20 to 25 watts of electricity. And this electricity comes from a combination of the water we drink, the oxygen we breathe, and the food that we eat. So when we eat unhealthy, it is not going to give us enough raw materials to really optimize my performance and produce more positive, good electrochemical activity. Because remember, those neurotransmitters that we produce comes from the food that we consume. So it is crucial that we have to remember here, nature's produce is in and man's quick fixes are out. And this does not mean that we can sometimes, from time to time, enjoy whatever it is that we want to enjoy. But we have to live a healthy lifestyle where we try to consume more white meats than red meats, where we absorb many natural oils like olive oil and so forth, eat at least about 5 different portions of fruits and vegetables every single day, consume nuts and seeds, we drink our 8 glasses of water a day, and so we try to make sure we provide the brain with the right raw materials so we can be healthy, we can have energy, and we can produce the right neurotransmitters so we run on good fuel more than bad fuel. Now, when we look at this last slide, water is key to the brain. About 80% of your brain's total volume consists of water. And the oxygen in water energizes our brain as such. And therefore, we need to drink about 8 glasses of water per day. And in times of stress, we need to improve that to about 16 glasses of water a day. So when we look at these 6 drivers, then we can see that all of them are of utmost importance, because all of these drivers will help us improve our performance if we can optimize that. And that is why it's so important in the profile that I have developed. We start by looking at people's the drivers that optimizes your brain performance. And ideally, you would like to be there where you are on an 80, a 90, or 100%, because then you are getting the most out of your brain. And when you function on that level where you are getting most out of your brain, that will be the place where you start impacting your brain, and the attributes in the next webinar, we will refer to them, the 7 attributes that influences your neuro flexibility. There are 7 neurophysiological factors that determine our neurological design, and the flexibility between these different factors will determine how neuroagile we are. But we have to remember that our brain fitness will influence that profoundly. I want to end this session by going back to the example of a ballet dancer. It's not just exercising the skills that makes me a fantastic ballet dancer, but the prerequisite to being able to execute those skills with precision and beauty is to be flexible, to be fit, and to be supple. Now, the analogy here is for us as people in the workplace. We need to focus on what makes us fit, what makes us flexible, and what makes us supple. And these 6 drivers that optimize our brain performance definitely contributes to our brain fitness.